William, happy Saturday. We're having our Friday happy hour on Saturday, but it's not quite a happy hour. It's a coffee hour today.
Yeah, and this past Saturday morning, but here's cheers, Joann.
In the early afternoon. It's okay. It's all right. You know, we like to draw outside the bounds, don't we, William? We're not going to be confined, right? We're
not
trying to
what?
be free thinkers. We're not going to be confined. We're going to be free thinkers. Happy hours can happen at any time of day. There we go. So here we are in the light of day. It's our last conversation. A little bit about, well, more about the economy, and also taxes, because of course that's an element that goes into how people think about how they feel about the economy in a given moment and how they feel about the government and the economy. Of course, there's the intersection of the two is taxes. But, you know, I was just the other day, me and a family member are thinking through selling a small piece of property. And the other day I was there very, very avidly sitting with my pen and my paper, thinking through, well, if we sell it this way, how many taxes are we going to pay? If we sell it that way, how many taxes are we going to pay? If we do something where we sell part of it this year and part of it next year, what's going to happen if so-and-so passes a new tax bill and there's a new tax rate? And it's just, you know, it's very interesting for me because I have a certain political perspective on things, of course, like everyone. But then when you sit down with pen and paper and you're working through the numbers on something that is personal to you, it always is the same thing, which is how can I pay the fewest taxes, right? I mean, that's everybody. That's natural. I don't think there's anything right or wrong about it. It's just what's so. But it is interesting for me to think through that and then also think it through my political perspective on who I vote for, and then also like that side of things. So I tee that up because I found myself having an interesting conversation with myself around, well, what could the tax rate be next year? And who would make that tax rate that way and who wouldn't? You know? And my assumptions too about what people from different political parties would do, because a lot of it is assumption as well that's fed into by a lot of, I don't know. I think the parties like to create these sorts of, you know, profiles around each other, like they're the tax and spend, or your taxes are going to go up and yada yada. So I say all that just to introduce our topic of taxation and politics, because it is for more people than you think. It is for more people. For a lot of people, this is a very much a deciding thing. Who's going to tax me more and who's going to tax me less, and that drives their vote, I think. So anyway, there you go. I serve it up to you, William, for your profound thoughts.
Well, I've been thinking about this since we mentioned that we were going to do this, and I reached back into 6 year ago. 6 years ago,
into the
we were
archives.
confronted with another election. We were in the middle of the tweet years, but you know, where political policy was based on 280 characters at a time, based in capital letters. And so I did
an exclamation point.
I did this series. The only thing I could do during that election was that I got up each morning for a week, and I made in the morning I had my coffee and I set up my video camera and I recorded some morning talks about some various subjects. And then I got sick, and after my fourth one, I was getting sick, and so I got up the next day, and I couldn't really make a video, but I read my paper on taxation. It's like a 3 or 4 page paper, and I read it and made a video of it. And then what I did, since we talked about doing this, I took that video from 6 years ago just now, and I clipped it down to just 10 minutes. So we posted that then as one of our conversations in this series on our YouTube channel. So if you go there and you just click political policy on our channel, you'll find that video. So that's a part of our conversation. but the basis of it is this. It's called a Tobin tax. And it was about 40 years ago. There was this great economist by the name of Tobin, and he said the biggest problem with our financial system was that it's just a big gambling house. It's just
Huh.
wild and mad and crazy gambling that
It's
is
the free
taking place
market, right?
with the people's lives, you know. And so all he said was that there is so many millions and billions and trillions of dollars just flowing constantly in this gigantic gambling casino that we ultimately always end up paying for in one way or another.
Especially when the casino,
That it be
especially when
subject
there's a
to
fall
that it
and
be subject
they got to be bailed out. Yeah.
to a little transaction tax. And what he wanted to do is just lay a little tax on the movement of money, so that every time money moved, there was just a light touch. And it was 40 or 50 years ago, it was just decided it would be too impractical. It just simply couldn't be done. How would it be collected or whatever? And so that was 40 or 50 years ago, Joann. But now then, every computer in the world just manages all of our transactions every single day of the week. And at the
Yep.
end of every weekend, they all come together in some way and they balance their books. And so that's where we are today. So what could be
Huh.
done today is that we simply, as a matter of policy, this is once again something that the people could make policy about. Should we replace our income tax with a tax on financial transactions? And the difference would be this, that instead of having an income, let's say that you and I were lucky enough to be making 100 grand a year right now, just as an arbitrary number. And right now we're paying a certain percentage of that that just goes right out of our paycheck and is never seen by us directly in the form of all kinds of taxes, not just income tax, but social security tax and all kinds of taxes. And what we're left with is something we try to manage to live on because we don't have any choice about the paying of the taxes. It's just
No.
simply done. And if you're a small business owner, it's the very same thing. You have to file those quarterly returns. And if you don't file those quarterly returns, they can come right in and scoop out your accounts right away. It's not a very long period of time before you're out
Yeah.
of business as a small business owner. So that's the realities of life. And not only that, but the income tax never really was imposed on working people until coming into World War II. And at the time the Social Security was introduced for the first time, there was withholding from worker salaries. And then
To pay for it. Yeah.
and then going into the war, of course, everyone wanted to suck up all those excess dollars that was suddenly flowing into the economy. And so they did that in the form of war bonds on one hand, and on the other hand, by actually withholding payroll reduction for paying taxes and Social Security. So that's where it was. But coming out of World War II, the tax on corporate income was like 75, 80%, I think. I mean, it's sky high. And for the wealthy, I mean, it was really high, super high taxation.
And that was under Eisenhower, wasn't
That
it?
was
And he
under
was a Republican
Eisenhower.
president.
That was under Eisenhower. And so that was a wonderful thing because what it did is that the burden of taxation was really being carried mostly or largely by these large corporations and so forth. And so, but coming out of that was a slow transfer of because corporations produce jobs, so therefore we can't tax them so highly and so forth down to the
I mean,
person point.
75-80% is an absurd amount of taxation. That's
Well,
for anybody. That's absurd
well,
in my
perhaps,
view.
except that the whole idea was that they largely during the war they're gathering all this excess income directly on the backs of people who are dying in the war, and in a way. So the taxes were largely justified at the time, but until we get to this point today, where there are many corporations pay no taxes at all. For one reason or another,
Right.
we have a
That's,
president
yeah.
of the United States that, Lord and behold, barely pays taxes himself. that's where we are. So what I proposed in this paper is that basically we just have a transaction tax, and what that means for you and me is that we file a return every year, just like we do now, except that the difference is that we're presumed to have a transaction equal to our payroll in a way, to what our income is in whatever way, but the tax on that could be like 1%. I mean, that's it.
You mean 1% of your pay?
Yeah, because that's your transaction. Your basic transaction would equal.
But you transact every month, though.
Yeah,
you get your paycheck.
No, but what I'm trying to say is that at the end of the year, when you file your return and you show the movement of money through your life, right? And so you say, okay, I received $100,000 from my employer last year, right? And from that, I have saved 10,000. I put 10,000 into savings. That money didn't move from you. It's just into savings. But also, if I had to provide my own health care, that's not money. There's what it comes down to is that what you finally have is what you spend your money on in your life, in terms of your home, your car, your food, your clothing, your lifestyle, and the things you do, and on that you would just simply pay a tax of about 1%. I mean, that's all. In a way, that is your dues as a member of our society that we live in, that is largely governed by a government that is almost entirely funded by a tax on the wealthy movement of money, by bankers and corporations.
But don't we all move money? I mean, don't we all?
Okay, here's the thing, is that you and me, we move our $100,000 a year, right? One way or another, that's it. Maybe we get lucky and we do this or that, but basically our movement of money is, let's say, it's like that one unit that if it would be taxed at 1%, your $100,000 is going to cost you what, $1,000 a year in taxes. That's your basic taxes. Okay, versus what is your basic taxes today? If you add in all of your income taxes and your Social Security taxes,
oh my goodness,
and your SSI and all of this stuff, what's your tax load? It's a hell of a lot higher than that. So what could we do to benefit this economy except to free workers and small business owners of that burden of taxation that is suddenly borne by the banking gamblers and the corporate gamblers and the traders and that movement of money is so vast that the 1% ka-ching upon it would both slow down their gambling. There would be a break on their gambling, and at the same time, it would produce inordinate revenues. I mean,
well, yeah, that was the thing.
I mean, we would have trillions to play with in terms of funding our government.
Well, also, when you mentioned this before about how much, what was the number in a given year you said that this would generate, or that Tobin
last year,
estimated?
I read this, I looked at this today, and I looked at my article, and I wrote this article back in about 2013. This was an old article in a way.
Right.
And I had 2012 figures. And I basically just used one place in this economic powerhouse casino that we live in, and that's the Chicago Board of Trade. And the Chicago Board of Trade, in the 2 years before that, did a quadrillion dollars worth of trades in that one exchange in a year. Okay, that's a lot of bucks, for a 1% tax on it. Because it would just, what it would do is it would slow down those trades. It would make them real to the people who are gambling with it.
Uh,
It would make it real.
because they actually have to pay something every time they do it. So they actually have to think about
something
whether the trade is worth it, because they actually are going to have a little bit of a fee every time they do it.
Just a ka-ching, just a touch.
Yeah.
Just a touch. And that touch would be more than that, though. It would be more than just the money but certainly the source of the money. But it would also be it would be transformative of our society in a way.
Well, think about, okay, so what's interesting to me, when you were quoting this before, because I mean, I don't have a sense of all the numbers, but it certainly sounds like there's a hell of a lot more tax revenue than we're pulling in now. Plus, if we're really concerned about the national debt, then this would be a way to actually address it. Right. Because we're never going to, I mean, I kind of agree with I agree with some of the alarm about the conservative viewpoint about the debt. I mean, like, when is that ever going to get paid? Who's going to pay it? The service on the debt, plus, the way we're in hock to China over the debt, these are all big problems. And like, what if we were to actually reconstruct our tax system so that we actually could address it? I mean, and also, like you say, what I wanted to say was kind of interrupting you and saying earlier was the gambling that you're talking about in this casino that we all live in. We've had to actually come in and save the day when people have gambled too much. We've had to do too big to fail. I mean, if that were to happen again today, we'd hear the same damn thing. We would hear too big to fail, and that we need to go in and bail them out. And yes, I understand that they paid it back, but it basically taught them that they can gamble and that their asses are covered. I mean, that was the big lesson.
Well, okay, they have the full, okay. Essentially, the bankers created the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is owned by the banks, and so basically there is that power within our economy, is because that's where it is. But that doesn't mean that we can't change our taxing laws in a way that are fair and requires them to pay for their participation or their use of our economic highway. I mean, we are the economy, not them. I mean, we're the ones who buy things and make things and do things and enjoy life and live, and they are not. They're robots. I mean, we've created these robots, to do things for us, and they are quite marvelous, but they have to be held in line,
Well, I think it's a really fascinating idea. I want to read your paper and read more about it because I haven't yet.
Yeah, yes.
And I also want to read Tobin. Did Tobin write a book?
I don't really know. It's like just one of those things. I mean, this is, something I did 20 years ago or more. I worked and talked about and thought about this. But I mean, well, Tobin just proposed the idea. I mean,
okay.
That's really, it's just the concept.
Got it.
I mean, there are many applications to it. For example, a corporation that has nothing but American workers, that is not taxed on its income, or it's on its payroll. 100, an American corporation with 100.
That's something that I have always.
Policy implications for this that are magnificent.
Absolutely. I actually, that's something that I've always had a big. Well, that's a whole other conversation about international trade and globalism and all that stuff. But bottom line is, why we allow American companies to go abroad, employ people in other countries, and then sell it back to us, and make all this profit out of basically demanufacturing our entire, and just going abroad. Like, why we allow that, I don't understand. But I'm probably just too simple to understand the macroeconomics of it. But to me, it just always raised a big question. It just looks like global, corporate greed, and then they're getting a tax break on top of it.
Well, okay, then, or that we allow foreign corporations to come in here and do business in the United States and use our courts and use our authorities and everything else to enforce their contracts. But then
but
by
not
the
the
same
same back
token,
where they are.
every night, ka-ching, ka-ching, and those that money that came in is transmitted out of the country. I mean, it is out of the country, by midnight. It's just that's another part of it. So under this, just real quickly, but let's leave this alone. Is the taxation? You have 100% American-owned corporation employing American citizens, or the people of America here. They do not pay any tax on that movement of money because it goes right through to the workers,
It
and then the
stays in the
workers are
country.
going to
Yeah.
pay their tax on it.
Yeah.
But if you are a foreign corporation doing business here, you don't have that. You only get 50% of it that goes to American workers. But if you are an American corporation that sends all your work, your payroll overseas, you don't get to deduct it at all. I mean, that because that you took
Yeah.
that money out of our economy and you put it in the economy of another country. So anyway, that's tax, and it is far more complicated. But there's something else we wanted to talk about.
There is, because, and it's so, I think it would be remiss of us not to mention it because it's just all over the news, which is the Supreme Court and the antics of judges on the Supreme Court. What I want to say is this. I think when people talk about the Supreme Court, they get in their political lane when they talk about it, right? What they notice, what they complain about, it's in their political lane. So what I want to say is what's gone on in the past with Thomas, what's gone on in the recent past with Thomas, and what's going on right now with Alito. I really want to just say this, that basically, like, if the liberal justices were behaving in some sort of similar fashion, I would call them out too. I mean, I really would. Like, hanging flags up there that are, undermining of the Constitution, doing loony things. I mean, I would call them out as well. But I find the behavior really disturbing and disgusting from a Supreme Court justice. Number one, but number two, I just find it, to me, it's so disturbing from the point of view of the court. Like, this is the institution that is supposed to be, that's the Supreme Court. It's supposed to have, it's supposed to be the paragon of impartiality. The institution that delivers and interprets the Constitution. Yes, I understand people have different philosophies and legal philosophies in terms of how they look at the Constitution. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the disturbing things that ProPublica, turned up last year about Thomas, about the trips and the friend, the billionaire friends who have cases before the court. And I just think if you're going to be on the Supreme Court, you need to be so so aware of the position that you have and the what you're supposed to be presenting to the country about your impartiality. Like, that should be, like, first and foremost in your mind. And the fact that I think, and this is the other thing I want to say, when it comes to the Supreme Court, I personally feel so, like, kind of hopeless about it, because these people are on the court forever. They're on the court till they die. Nothing can be done about their behavior if it goes over the line. There's some pathetic sort of attempt to actually have an ethics code, which it's incredible that hasn't existed before. But even so, it couldn't really be enforced. It doesn't look like, even if so. You feel like, really, like you're watching this behavior. You're disturbed that this is happening to one of our most revered institutions, and then you don't feel like there's any way of dealing with it. That it's just, you're just locked in to these people on the court for however long they decide to be on the court, or until they die. So to me, the Supreme Court in the last few years has become an especially depressing topic, in terms of how things have been going in the country, and the division and all that stuff that we see. The Supreme Court seems to be the stage on which it's the most, it seems like it's going to have the most long-term impact, really. of the politics of the last few
Well,
years.
but the Supreme Court is not beyond the law. I
It
mean,
certainly seems like it.
it
I
certainly
mean,
seems like it. I mean, it certainly seems like it because they're at the same token allowing the Unitarian president to also be almost beyond the law. But they're not a law unto themselves because they are both created by the Constitution, and these justices serve for life upon good behavior. And that's the question. And what is good behavior and what does that mean? I mean, there have only been like not a whole lot of judges impeached by the Congress, federal judges, and only one Supreme Court justice was ever impeached by Congress.
that was
Uh,
a long time ago, right?
Salmon Chase
Right.
after Lincoln,
Uh-huh.
and but but they are not beyond the law. But I've actually given this some thought, and this is one of those things
Of course you have.
where this was not quite not quite a lucid dream, but it was something that came to me as I thought about this issue in preparation for this conversation,
Hmm.
and that is that okay in the circuit courts in the circuit courts that lead up to the Supreme Court. A
Right.
case comes in and it is then heard by a three-judge panel,
Mm.
randomly assigned. A three-judge panel is assigned to hear it.
Right.
And if someone is then unhappy with the result, they can appeal it to the entire circuit, which then votes upon it as an entire circuit, as I understand it. And then it is heard en banc by the entire circuit, and then it would then go forth. And so what I imagined was that we handle the Supreme Court like this, and that is that it is subject to the Judiciary Act and other acts of Congress, and that
Okay.
Congress can, properly motivated, pass a law that imposes the same three-judge system on the Supreme Court as a matter of organization, because Congress can do this. They can say that, okay, we can increase it, like Roosevelt was going to pack the court with additional justices. It's not a court packing scheme. But if there's presently 9 and justices, and if 3 more were appointed to a 12-judge panel, and you say,
Mhm.
well, wait a second, that's unbalanced. It could tie. But it's organized differently, and that is that a case comes in and it is randomly assigned to a 3-judge panel who then renders a verdict on that certiorari, on that writ that has been made to the court. And then it then goes to the entire court, and it requires 7 votes of the 12 to have it considered by the entire court. And if not, the ruling of the 3-judge panel becomes law. It's just the same system that works quite well in the circuit courts can then be applied to the Supreme Court. And you still have Supreme Court decisions based upon the 12 of them. But if there's a tie vote, and again, the Chief Justice is but 1 vote of the 12.
Mhm.
But if there's a tie vote, then the ruling of the 3-judge panel stands.
So when you say it's randomly decided, so is it like
Randomly appointed.
random? I'm not randomly decided, but randomly appointed when a case comes in. You mean it could be just any 3? Like what?
Any 3.
How is How is it done with the
Totally
circuit?
random. Computer random. A
Computer
logarithm.
random.
A
Okay.
computer
Uh-huh.
logarithm. Quantum number random. I mean, so that it is just absolutely, it is that those 3 judges are assigned to that case, and they are the judges on that case.
And then it can be like appealed to the entire court.
Right. And
Okay.
they appeal it to the entire court, and if 7 of the 12, a majority, vote for it to be considered by the entire court, then it goes to a full hearing before the entire 12 who hear the case and render a decision as a
Hmm.
en banc Supreme Court, as a Supreme Court en banc.
So you're saying that this is a way of, I mean, so the whole goal of this would be what? To like, I
To
mean, to deal
organize
with,
the court, to make sense of it. What it is right now, it's like a it's like a I don't know, the thought occurs to me, it's like almost like an evil priesthood in a way, in their black robes. It's like they're there behind our government and they're just making these pronouncements, and Jackson said, "Where's your army?" I mean, there is a reality to that as well, as to their
Jackson said, where's
pronouncements.
your,
I mean, the power of the federal marshal only goes so far. But when you're taking the chief of staff of the,
that is
of the
something
Joint
Jackson
Chiefs
would
of
say.
Staff into custody, Um, but I do think, though, that the court could, if Congress properly motivated. Okay, let's just assume, Congress could be properly motivated. Perhaps as a result of these conversations come this fall, the Voters' Bill of Rights is the first order of the new Congress, who've been elected because of their positions on the Voters' Bill of Rights, and they are going to set a few things right. So.
There we go.
And,
There we
and one of the
go.
things that could be set
Let's live
right
in
would
that
be the
reality
court,
for a minute.
and,
Yeah.
and the court could just simply be organized for efficiency to follow the circuit court system, and to point immediately. You have 3 new vacancies for the new president, who's also hopefully been elected because he or she supported the Voters' Bill of Rights. And was prepared to administer a government that was responsive to the people.
So, okay. Well, I mean, to the outside, I mean, I love how all this sounds, but to the outside looking in, it looks like, well, you're just trying to get another 3 justices on the court because you don't like how the breakdown is right now with the conservative majority, right? So you're
No,
saying,
one more thing. The Judiciary Act of 2024 also includes that there be an inspector general appointed to oversee various
uh-huh.
matters involving investigations of the new Supreme Court and their antics of whatever form they might take, including failure to pay and report income taxes, and
And
failure
gifts.
to follow federal guidelines on reporting of gifts, and to and talk about fraudulent business record keeping by this other person up in New York. That's certainly borders on fraud to receive a gift of $250,000 that is a debt forgiven, which by law means that is income and has to be reported on your income tax as income for that year that it was so
You're right.
generously forgiven by this good friend, and things like that. And so,
And the fact that these people who are sitting on the court, whatever their political persuasion or legal philosophy, the fact that they think that they can engage in these kinds of behaviors as this sort of as needing to be in a paragon of transparency and
well,
impartiality, that's what rocks my mind. I mean, in terms of who are sitting on this court. I mean, like,
Well, okay, it is okay if there is if the court is is divided into 3, it's the executive, the Congress, and the judiciary. Well, the Congress has all kinds of self-investigative mechanisms to investigate themselves. My God, they do it, day
and the
in, day out,
president. Yeah.
and then the executive, of course, nearly all of the executive branch offices, I believe, now have inspector generals. That's like a standard operation in all of these federal agencies to ensure fairness and openness of investigations into their operations as a matter of law. The Supreme Court has none of that. But if the Supreme Court did have an inspector general that was responsive, and to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and to the chairs of the Judiciary Committees of Congress, Senate and House. And so that the Inspector General, was responsible to both of them equally, openly, with all of their reports at the same time, simultaneously handed to the Chief Justice, handed to the chairs of the Judiciary Committees, and their recommendations of the Inspector General on any investigation undertaken as to any member of the Supreme Court would include recommendations not only of censure, a censure, but also impeachment, certainly, if high crimes and misdemeanors.
Yeah.
But also a recommendation of recusal. They don't get to make up their minds if they are biased.
Yeah.
Or
like their own,
here's the thing, as a trial lawyer, the thing I had in my briefcase, I had a piece of paper that was never outside of my possession as a trial lawyer. It required me only to put the name of the judge on it, and I handed it in, and I could challenge any judge I was sent before. I didn't have to give a reason. I just said, it was a certificate of prejudice. And it's like a little, it's not, it's like you don't want to ever appear before that judge again, because you are insulting the judge
of course,
in a way, but you can also challenge the judge for cause. That's a peremptory challenge that I carried, and I think I only exercised it a couple of times.
I guess the one thing, that you would have to be built into this, which I think it easily could be, is to make sure that we're not, there is something to be said for not subjecting judges to political, prosecutions.
Exactly.
And so I think, because we've seen Congress undertake prosecutions on very flimsy bases, right? So my only concern would be to make there would need to be things in place that make that impossible in the case of a Supreme Court justice. I mean, yeah.
I'm just saying this is just an Inspector General who renders a report, but it's a public report.
Right.
I don't know. When you say public, I'm sure that there's levels of how reporting gets made to ensure that Inspector Generals can be effective, but there is a whole basis for Inspector Generals throughout the government. I mean, in every department, it's nothing new. There's all kinds of law that's set up. Due process is involved in all of these things, but I just think that the Inspector General system should be applied to the Supreme Court, including its justices.
Yeah. And because the thing is, what we're having now is we're just seeing we're seeing the faith in the court, the public opinion of the court, just
plummet.
Oh, it's imploding. I mean, and that's a fundamental thing that makes our entire basis for our government less stable. If we really start to see that the Supreme Court the justices engaged in very questionable behavior, very politically partisan, it just undermines one of the core, because that's one thing about the states, it's when you go to other countries, the judiciary has people do not look to the judiciary as a way of resolving or for remedies. They don't, because they know, in some countries, countries I've lived in, former Soviet Union countries, they know that the judiciary is corrupt. So when you start to have a society that that can't look to the court system for a remedy, you start to see all kinds of distortions happen across the society. Right? And we don't have that here yet. I would hope that we would never have that, but that's what happens when that takes place. And so it is a really important thing that we put something in place to preserve the public, that what has been generally high trust in our court system, and we need to preserve that. So the Inspector General idea is a good one. I think that we need to do something. You know, we need to do something about it because
Well,
it's really becoming like what I've seen happen over the last while since the insurrection, you know, with Thomas and the wife and now this. It's really feeling like the Supreme Court. And then, you know, the other thing I'll say is that there have been cases. There was one this week about racial gerrymandering. Was it in South Carolina?
yeah, South Carolina. I didn't totally follow that, but I
Well,
think that,
what concerned me about it was that this is the second or third time that I've heard that the court has taken up on review something that already had. I mean, they used to really trust the fact-finding trial that was carried out by lower courts. You know, there used to be a kind of deference to the fact that you've had already a trier of like a really thorough trier of fact, and that we're not. But now the court is like on some of these more political cases not kind of accepting the prior court's sort of prior evidence and evaluation of things, and really kind of digging in on the political stuff to kind of redo that's been done by prior courts, whereas in the Supreme Court in the past has kind of respected those prior trials, and they've taken up questions that more have to do with the constitutionality question. Whereas now it's like they're digging into the facts of the case. And so that starts to concern me too, because they're doing it on cases like this racial gerrymandering question in South Carolina. That was that's what I heard the evaluation of. The people were really surprised that they took that up. So anyway, that's my sum total of all my angst about the Supreme Court.
well, the difficult part of it is that there has been a balance between moderates in some regards. There weren't extremes. The extremes didn't really get on the court
Right.
on either side. So and they, to a large extent, originally, of course, they were the good old boy network of one form or another. So there was a high degree of collegiality on the court and their functions. But we have the appointment process has become so politicized, where the Senate flat refused to consider a candidate for the court pending an election. And it wasn't as though it was next week or next month. It was like months out from the election when they made that decision to not allow it to go forth. But in any case, it's obviously and clearly a political appointment. And and it has gotten where the litmus test, if it became the agenda of a very small minority of the people of this country. I mean, that's
True. Yeah.
that's where it's gotten down to, is the basic litmus test, uh, and 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 uh, and 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 so it's I don't know. I don't know how you can respect that and expect it to not be political. I mean, look at Bush v. Gore. I mean, they just
I know.
simply they took a majority vote and appointed George W. Bush as
And
president of
then
the
they
United
said,
States,
and then they
and they said this
this
opinion
can't be a
cannot be
precedent.
cited in the future for any purpose whatsoever,
I mean,
except to
I mean,
appoint this
that
this
was like the
this
most
this.
self-aware moment of the court. It's like, we know that this is so political.
Yeah.
Here's a decision, and it can't ever serve as a precedent. Wow. I mean, like, isn't that the whole point of the court, is to actually interpret the
Well,
Constitution and set precedent? And you're saying this court case can't be a precedent. I mean, that was the beginning. I mean, really, what's happened recently is, and certainly what happened with the one president getting to appoint three justices and everything that went on with the appointment process and with Merrick Garland. I mean, just that is so mind. But the reality is there has been a rot that has started in the court for years, and it started in the, I don't know, I mean, like you said, like in the 70s, at least with the Burger Court, there was a sense of some collegiality. There was a sense of, like you said, moderates. Yeah, some people had different legal philosophies or whatever, but there was still a sense of like people didn't color outside the lines. And then when Reagan tried to appoint Bork, who seemed like a nut job, but he didn't even get on the court. Nowadays, if he had tried, he probably would have got on the court.
Oh yeah,
because now, I mean, he was considered too extremist to get on the court, and so he didn't get on the court. But now it's 20, 30 years later, and people who are that fringy have gotten on the court. And
well, I mean, well, I don't want to get into the personalities. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I could, but
I'm sorry, William. I went there.
I mean, the appointments are largely based on religion at this point.
Mm-hmm.
The last few, certainly Barrett, is that, and that her name's Barrett, and Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch, and there's been the shift really to way to the right in all of these appointments. And it has certainly moved the court generally in a way that is less tolerant of individual freedoms and certainly more tolerant of corporate failures. And in terms of where their friends are, that it seems that I worked only for a year in Washington, D.C. 1 year in Washington, D.C. Really turned me off on the concept of power. But there is something about Washington, D.C. that empowers people to associate with leadership, whether it is in corporate leadership or other forms of leadership at universities or whatever, with people who have a certain amount of power and particularly money. And suddenly these are your new friends, and these new friends all want something, and that's where they're it's like Thomas keeps saying, these are just my friends. They're paying for my son's education. They're buying my parents' home. They're doing all of these things for me because they're my friends, and that's all well and good, but you really shouldn't.
Whatever happened to being concerned about even the appearance of impartiality, the appearance of impropriety?
That's the basic rule that applies to all other courts. Everything below the Supreme Court, basically, that would be charged under various organizational structures that the name of which escapes me. But in other words, all judges below the Supreme Court are subject to a whole review process and to another whole set of ethics that are different than their self-imposed set of ethics that they themselves get to decide. They don't even vote as a Supreme Court to challenge the ethics of their own member. Their own member decides for himself whether their behavior is okay or ethical. And if not, they sit there and they cast a vote on the case. And that would be one of the things the Inspector General would say is there should be a recusal in this matter. It wouldn't be necessarily a condemnation of
it should just say
this conduct. It's just like this should be and have a process for the appointment of another justice to the 3-judge panel. Ka-ching, the computer pops another name into the slot. It just seems to me to be a way to deal with the problem organizationally, and just it's not court packing.
Well, I mean,
it depends on who is appointing the judge. I mean,
but that's the thing. I mean,
it depends on who gets elected this fall.
Right, who gets elected this fall, and court packing or not court packing. I mean.
Right. It could just not be court packing. It could just be court overloading. It could sink the boat, I mean, seriously. I mean, if they're, the whole thing about being originalist, it's like, it's like whose origin are you examining?
It's the same. It's the same thing with all these like irredentist movements across Europe and things like this. It's like people think about what I noticed when I was in Europe is like when people say though that we this was our land or whatever, they're always going back to a specific time period, right? They're choosing which part of history they're looking
Right.
at for which empire was in place and
Right.
which borders where the borders were that they wanted. Yeah, well, let's go back 100 years before that. Where were the borders? Or how about 100 years after? I mean, like it's completely about people just bring their own bias to it and just decide to pick the time period they want to describe as when the greater blank blank was around, greater Serbia, greater whatever. It seems to me like it's not so different when people talk about being originalists to the Constitution, because you still see them interpret things in such a way that still don't make sense with originalism. I mean, did the Constitution actually say that, and that? And by the way, the Constitution, also allowed a lot of things were in play when the Constitution came around. Like there's a lot of classes of people that had no rights whatsoever. And is that what we're going to say we're going back to? I mean, so it's just, anyway, there's a whole long conversation there. I think we have a lot here to dig into. There's more. I feel like there's more that's going to happen.
What are we going to talk about next week, Joann?
Oh, well, it depends on what happens between now and next week.
Well, that's true on one hand.
Kind of current events here, William.
Okay, but we've dealt with the court. I think we've dealt the court a basic,
as much as we can.
A nice touch. It is. It's not a condemnation. They all get to keep their jobs. They get to keep their motor homes, and and fly off to Italy on some trips.
They get to keep the gifts too. Okay.
But anyway, I did think about something in a way, and that is that if you're prepared, it is to actually talk about the presidency. We do have a presidential contest going on. Now, I don't know that I necessarily want to talk about the candidates because we've already talked about them. We did that one, we did that 3 or 4 weeks ago. 2 old guys, is this the best you can do in terms of parties? I mean, we've talked about that. But what I would like to kind of touch upon is the idea of what we could do if we, the people, see, this is what I'm saying is that if we, the people, were to organize our government in a way that better served us, what other things might we accomplish? That's
in terms of the presidency,
right?
In terms of the quality of candidates available.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just assume that somehow we elect a candidate, to be president, and for whatever reason. Now, I'm not running for president, but I've talked about this before, and maybe even to you about what I would do, if I had the job of organizing a government, which is a massive job. I mean, Trump failed utterly. He couldn't form a government. Biden certainly, has formed a government. Even George W. Bush formed a government because his father's, whole operation was still in place, and basically just
plucked all those people and brought them over.
He just sort of took over all of that. But in terms of being able to form a government, what would you do? Well, I think again it's a matter of organization, and let's talk about it, next week. But in terms of the basic organization though would be that there be a triumvirate of women, 3 women.
Oh, we'll have to talk about that.
Assistant presidents, the vice president is a woman, and they basically
we'll have to talk about that. I don't know that I fully agree with you.
But anyway.
So that'll be next week's spirited discussion. All right. Well, cheers. I have a couple drops of coffee left here.
And again, cheers to the American people, to the people of America. May your consent to be governed never be taken
Never be
for
taken
granted.
for granted.
Never be
Absolutely.
taken for granted.
Never.
And because your consent to be governed is manifested by your vote, and
Mhm.
and you do not exercise your vote by withholding it.
Mm,
You exercise your vote by casting your vote. And
mm,
and between now and November, if enough people are motivated to cast their vote
mm.
and to vote for a voters' bill of rights that would transform their government, well, then that's another story, Joann.
All right.
Take
Take
care.
care, William. All
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. All right. Talk to you later. Bye bye.